The fate of humankind rested on Mark Ellis's shoulders as he began humanity's unprecedented invasion. Though a veteran of border wars, the full weight of this historic invasion weighed heavily on him. His rousing speech left no doubt. Earth's survival depended on victory here today. As the Relnari resistance crumbled faster than expected, Mark grappled with the morality of their actions. But humanity's future survival required victory on Valkar 6. Dust rose as the human soldiers moved in on Valkar 6. The air smelled burned from blaster fire. Mark Ellis watched his troops spread out to secure the area. Machines hummed, officers barked orders, the ground shook. Relnari warriors in giant exosuits stomped out from the smoke. The suits moved fast for their size. They charged the human lines. Mark knew they'd underestimated the Relnari weapons. Weapons roared. The suits tore through, turning cover to rubble. Soldiers scattered and reformed. Sarah, Mark's second-in-command, directed units to fall back over the comms. Her calm orders cut through the noise. She got them out with few losses. Later, on the Resolute's bridge, Mark demanded answers from the intel officer. "You said you knew their tech. Your analysis was flawed," Mark said. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes blazed. The officer stood rigid, clutching reports. "We were desperate for a win. It clouded our assessment." Mark's jaw tightened as he looked at Valkar 6 below. His expectations had betrayed him. Across Valkar 6, rumors of Mark's grit spread through Relnari ranks. They feared and respected him. That night on the Resolute's bridge, Mark addressed the crew. He looked at the hologram of the Relnari capital. "This ends tonight," he said. "Target command. Minimal casualties." The gunnery officer's hands flew over the controls, targeting the stronghold. "Fire!" Mark ordered. The Resolute's guns charged with a deafening roar. Deadly arcs lanced down at Relnari command. Mark watched, resolved. His strike would shape two worlds, though his heart ached for the blood that had to be shed. Mark watched the Resolute's guns hammer the Relnari command center. He expected the structure to crumble, but as the smoke cleared, the building still stood. The leadership had survived. In the days after, the war shifted. Relnari fighters emerged from the ruins, hiding among the rubble. They struck fast at the humans before vanishing. Earth's swift advance slowed to trench warfare. Skirmishes drained them, casualties piled up. Mark stood pale in the war room, each new death hitting him. His soldiers looked to him as their rock, but doubt showed in his eyes, the cost of war wearing him down. Sarah approached steady despite the ship's tremors. "We can't keep this up," she said quietly. "We have to win them over." Mark listened stiff. They had a captured Relnari elder, Kethar. Maybe it was time for something bold. He released Kethar himself, escorted him to the dropship. "Let's try something new," he said with a nod. Kethar's ceasefire call shocked both sides. Some Relnari screamed for blood, but others, tired of fear, whispered of peace. Mark seized the chance. "Get aid supplies ready," he told logistics. Food, medicine, anything needed. Trucks rolled from the human base over war-torn fields. They carried only aid crates. Wary Relnari civilians watched as humans extended hands of food and bandages. Trust was fragile, but had to start somewhere. In those moments, working together, a new bond formed, worth the risk Mark had taken. He watched, vowing silently. This was the path forward, for victory and lasting peace. Mark's wristcom kept beeping. It reminded him how bad things were on Earth. The latest message from command hit hard. Earth's economy was crumbling. The text said, "Win this war fast. Earth can't keep this up much longer." On Valkar 6, Mark dealt with dust and chaos daily. Enemy Relnari slipped through his defenses when he least expected it. Explosions erupted around their camps without warning. Screams and shouts filled the air. Desperate humans struggled to respond. Mark and Sarah inspected the perimeter when a blast wave knocked them down. Dirt and hot metal flew as the air crackled with the smell of plasma fire. Mark's ears rang from the roar. He dug himself out and found Sarah nearby. Her uniform was shredded, but her eyes still burned with intensity. "We're easy targets out here," Sarah said, brushing debris from her hair. Mark nodded and helped her up. Back at the med station, a doctor patched up their fresh wounds. They sat in silence. Mark's brow furrowed as his conscience ate at him. "We've become just like them," he muttered, staring at his blood-soaked bandage. "Conquerors, imperialists, everything our history warned us about." Sarah leaned in close, whispering, "We do what's needed for Earth, for humanity." Mark's comm pinged, interrupting their talk. It was Kithar asking to meet discreetly, a chance at negotiating peace. They met in the ruins of an old Relnari temple. Cracked columns stood amid hallowed ground. Kithar approached, his face grim but stance proud. With war's wreckage around them, pleasantries seemed foolish. "I've seen enough death," Kithar began steadily. He told of Relnari history, cities rising from ashes, art singing of the stars. He spoke of his people's fears, their struggle as humans expanded. As night fell, Sarah joined them, listening hard. The Relnari tale mirrored humanity's own past. "Unity and diversity was our strength," Sarah said. "Maybe it's time we extend that idea beyond our species." Mark weighed each word, knowing the stakes. Peace could end bloodshed and unite them. But Earth Command's demands for victory still pulled at him. "I'll push for peace," Mark said firmly. "It's the only path worth taking." Kithar's eyes flickered with new hope. The race was on. Earth's patience faded as the splinter faction threatened. Mark put everything on the line for the fragile hope of alliance. He would seize peace or die trying. All the alarms sounded at the main human base on Valkar 6. A wall of dust came at them, Vathor's forces charging like a storm. In his combat gear, Mark saw them advance through his helmet's display. He looked for weak spots as they came. "Get ready!" Mark barked into his radio to the whole base. The soldiers scrambled, manning guns, taking cover, checking weapons. The air felt tight. Vathor led the charge, firing up his troops. They smashed through the base's defenses. Explosions shook the ground and flung debris into the sky, the sound punching Mark's ears through his helmet. He gripped his rifle, jaw tense. This was it, their stand on Valkar's soil. The Relnari broke in, right into brutal close combat. Mark jumped down where soldiers were fighting and dying. His rifle cracked steady shots into the chaos. He saw him then, Ethan, young and new, but the kid moved with raw courage. He dove into a collapsed shelter. He pulled 2 hurt buddies out and dove back in. Mark watched, counting seconds, wondering if it was the last he'd see of him. Moments later, Ethan burst out again, dragging the squad's heavy gunner to safety. Around them, the fight turned. The sight of one man defying death ignited the soldiers. They rallied. After an hour, Vathor retreated. The stink of metal and blood hung thick. Mark stood with his cheering troops. They'd won, but the ground held their sacrifice. In the quiet, Mark found Ethan sitting by a truck, cleaning his rifle. He clapped his shoulder. "You saved lives today," Mark said, his voice steady with gratitude. "You remind us what we fight for." Ethan just nodded, eyes on the medics and wounded. "Doing my job, sir," he replied. Sarah came over, a data drive in her hand, pulled from a crashed enemy ship. "Vathor plans to hit the Resolute," she told Mark, locking eyes with him. He trusted her to handle it, like she always did. He watched as she walked away to get her team ready. Sure steps, born leader. Hours later, under Valkar's twin moons, Sarah's team slipped out. Precision, not force. Phantoms intercepting the threat before it could happen. No battle, just quick takedowns. Word traveled fast about the disaster they'd stopped. Command's short message came, a nod to Mark's wins. They gave him room to negotiate peace, but fast. Ethan's bravery spread among human and Relnari alike. Respect grew for these humans who fought for their people. Talk of peace breathed, fragile but alive. On the command deck, Mark stared at the map showing the next day's battles, but now, a chance for peace he clung to. "Sir," Sarah said from the doorway, "peace conference ready. But if we fail?" "We won't fail," Mark said. "We can't." The pressure was crushing. Every eye watched them. Every heart waited on the meeting to decide fate, peace or war. Mark was ready. He had to be. The steel hallways of the Resolute rang with bootsteps and talking as everyone arrived for peace talks between Earth and Relnari. Mark stood at the head of the meeting room, with flags of both sides on the walls. Kithar walked in limping from an old war wound and nodded at Mark. Tension filled the room like electricity. Human and Relnari officers lined the walls, ready to grab their guns. Every noise sounded loud. Mark spoke first. "We're here to end this war in a way both sides can live with," Mark said, his voice echoing. Kithar followed. "This fight has cost too much. If we unite, we can heal." Whispers went around. Humans looked unsure. Relnari talked in grunts and waved their hands sharply. Then alarms blared. Ethan came over the speakers. "Intruders in engineering! Vathor's men, but we trapped them!" On camera, Ethan and his team moved in sync, flanking and disarming the saboteurs at gunpoint. The news of sabotage passed through the room, igniting old fears. Both sides shouted accusations. "This is your peace?" a Relnari general yelled, touching his gun. Mark raised his hands for calm. "Extremists did this, not us who want peace." Kithar agreed with a nod. "Don't let those afraid of unity stop us." Talks continued, but sharper now with a shared threat. Mark laid out his offer plainly. "We can rebuild Valkar 6 together if we share technology and govern together." Even doubters now nodded cautiously. Kithar listened, then agreed. "I'll bring this proposal to my people." A fragile breakthrough. Then Mark's wristcom beeped a threat from Earth Command: win or be replaced. Mark's heart sank at the gun-like threat from Earth. He glanced at Sarah, who agreed without words to play both sides. "We stick to the plan," Mark told her later alone. "Peace with Relnari, united against Earth Command." Sarah nodded firmly. "We'll need every friend we can get. We'll outsmart them." As everyone left with a deal in the balance, Mark told Kithar, "For our worlds, we'll make this work." The talks ended not with joy, but determination. The Resolute hummed as plans were set. Earth wanted a quick win, but Mark thought long-term. The real fight was just starting. Mark stood before the communications screen on the Resolute, his face broadcast across Earth and Valkar 6, showing the lines from battle. "People of Earth," he started, "I'm not just your commander. I'm human like you. Our path brought us here to war. But I say this, peace is our strength. It takes courage, not weakness. We must stand together." Screens across Earth lit up with Mark's face. The rubble of Valkar 6 loomed behind him. Kithar spoke too. The elder's voice held wisdom. "For survival, we must compromise with the humans. Our histories led us here. We must change or die." Demonstrations erupted on Earth. Huge crowds flooded the streets, chanting for Mark's peace. The people, tired of fear and war's cost, rallied strong. Earth Command was blindsided. On Valkar 6, humans and Relnari started gathering. In battered squares over shared drinks, they talked of Earth's oceans and Valkar's twin moons. Laughter echoed. Their music floated on the wind. Sarah sat scanning data, focused. She sifted encrypted messages, tracing treason in Earth Command against Mark. She found proof. "Ethan!" she called. He approached, face hardened by war, but eyes bright with loyalty. We've got them, Sarah said, giving him the data. Show this to the others. Together they exposed the traitors. Earth Command retreated, its plot revealed. Mark's authority stood firm. After the coup failed, Mark watched Valkar 6's sky. The betrayal only hardened his resolve for peace. It was now the only path. In days that followed, humans and Relnari shared aid and hope. Soldiers who once took aim now passed bricks and tools, rebuilding the destroyed. This bond was more than a ceasefire. It showed life's resilience, two species becoming one against the odds. Earth Command's deadline had forced Mark's hand, but the people's will now carried it forward. Peace had been a gamble in the dark, but watching his soldiers laugh with Relnari children, Mark knew humanity had won. Mark stood on the command deck. Earth's leaders stared back from the screen, resigned. Public cries for peace echoed across space. The war sapped their spirit. "Commander Ellis," the general said, "we endorse the peace agreement. Proceed." Mark nodded, lips tight. One fight down, another loomed. Vathor rejected the peace talks, beaming hateful messages across Relnari. His call stirred the hardened warriors. Mark turned to the officers crammed into the Resolute's war room. Screens and maps covered the walls, tracking troops and signals. "We've got the green light from Earth," Mark said, "but Vathor's forces refuse peace. We end this threat together." The officers nodded, united. Sat images showed Vathor's ragged troops holed up in Valkar 6's canyons. The human Relnari army roared onto the rocky field with precision. Vehicles growled, aircraft screamed overhead, troops marched in tight packs with weapons ready. Rumbling tanks flanked by Relnari in agile suits drove the spearhead. Vathor's zealots charged head-on. Fervor met discipline. Discipline prevailed. Measured coalition fire suppressed the chaotic return barrage. Ethan stalked the front lines, helmet tracking targets through the chaos. He darted between positions, rifle barking. Mark watched from above, coordinating strikes, searching for Vathor. Through the smoke, Vathor appeared, rallying troops, brandishing a weapon. Ethan saw him too. He dropped behind rubble and signaled his squad. They flanked Vathor's position. Only the crack of gunfire and crunch of earth filled the air. Then silence as Ethan leapt out, tackled Vathor, and wrestled him down. Vathor's hulking frame crumpled in Ethan's grip. Cuffs clicked shut. Leaderless, Vathor's forces lost heart. The coalition pressed their advantage, driving the zealots back until no fight remained. Mark descended to Ethan, who stood guard over captive Vathor. "Good work," Mark said. "Your courage paved the road to peace." Ethan just nodded, solemn. Their victory carried a grim cost. With the hardliners defeated, preparations for the peace signing began. An open field, once cratered, now swept clean. Rows of seats arranged, a podium raised. Earth and Relnari flags snapped side by side, a shared commitment. Dignitaries arrived in formal wear, stark against the smoky backdrop. The signing table stood ready, documents stacked, pens lined up like silent witnesses. Mark and Kithar stood at the podium as the crowds hushed. "Today we end conflict, start anew," Mark said, voice clear. "This is our future," Kithar added, tone steady and deep. One by one they signed, each name a stroke toward a shared destiny. As the last name marked the page, cheers erupted, a collective sigh of relief and hope. The ceremony ended not with gunfire, but with songs and stories from two peoples gazing together to the stars. Mark's commitment brought them here, to cooperation forged from war's fire and cooled by the promise of peace. Valkar 6 was loud with building. Aliens and humans worked together. They barked orders in both languages. Holograms of plans flickered in the air. Concrete flowed and metal locked into place. From the ruins, new buildings rose. Steel bones healed the sky. In an unfinished high-rise, a joint council of humans and Relnari met. Mark led them, no longer in uniform. Relnari stretched their long necks, talking in vibrations. They looked over maps on the table. Some pointed to power lines, others to roads and water. Arguments flared up. A Relnari wrinkled their snout in frustration. Mark raised a hand and spoke firmly, bridging the gap with tech and patience. "Think you can handle all the talking?" Sarah's voice crackled in Mark's earpiece. She watched from the resolute bridge. "It's what we fought for," Mark replied. "Building, not destroying." Below, Sarah nodded, confident as the new commander. Screens showed the busy planet grid. On the ground, Ethan directed traffic with new stripes on his uniform. His commands were sharp, hand signals crisp. Under his watch, trucks rumbled down Unity's streets. Homes of both species lined the roads. Kids laughed and ran between tents, selling crafts, food, and tech. Humans and Relnari worked together in labs. Farmers collaborated in greenhouses bursting with hybrid crops. Unity thrived. Alien diplomats visited, ships casting shadows. They walked the market, eyeing the cooperation. Whispers of a new alliance spread. In his office, Mark read messages from these planets. He crafted careful replies, weighing each word. There were setbacks. A water project stalled over culture clashes, sparking heated words. Mark mediated, steering the politics. A trader and an artisan fought over a contract. Voices rose until Mark stepped in, translating the terms to calm them. At night, ambassadors gathered around fires in the square. They shared meals, scents mingling. Stories were told of Earth's seas and Valkar's mountains, tightening the circle. Unity became a beacon of peace over war. Mark watched the growing lights from his balcony. Each one was a home, business, shared dream. This was humanity's new face, hand in hand with the Relnari, bonding across space. At its heart stood Mark, forging this future, now its architect of peace. Years passed since war blackened Valkar 6. Now the planet pulsed with harmony that echoed among the stars. Unity stood at the heart of this rebirth, a sprawling hub where humans and Relnari wove a tight community of interspecies teamwork. Buildings scarred by battle now displayed symbols of a shared future. Mark Ellis navigated the halls of politics, his uniform replaced by diplomacy's robes. His dance partner was Kithar, the Relnari elder whose face held wisdom's lines. One sunny morning, Mark stood in Unity's huge central assembly hall. Sunlight flooded through the transparent ceiling onto the diverse crowd below. Species from distant stars filled the seats, buzzing with excitement. Mark approached the podium, nodding to Kithar. "Thank you for joining us," Mark said, his steady voice amplified. Kithar rose, adding his deep tones. "Our unity here sets an example for all." Together they outlined their vision through concrete plans, not empty promises. Trade deals, defense pacts, cultural exchanges. Handshakes and signatures sealed once unthinkable agreements. Aboard the Resolute, now a peacekeeper, Admiral Sarah watched the delicate balance of power. Her eyes scanned the star map, a sea of stars and lines showing Earth's reach and her duty to protect it. Her crew worked efficiently, respecting her quiet strength. "Keep patrols clear of Allied space," Sarah ordered decisively. "No shows of force." Her gaze lingered on the map, calculating moves to uphold peace without weakness. On Valkar 6, mixed cadets drilled under Ethan's scrutiny. Dust swirled as they ran simulations, shouts in both languages filling the air. "Watch your left," Ethan called to a vulnerable cadet. A Relnari trainee responded, covering the gap with skill. The simulation ended. Ethan faced the tired recruits, pride showing through his stoic mask. Fight together, protect each other, trust. That's how we keep the peace, he stated firmly. At twilight, Mark and Cathar strolled through lively green commons. Families of both kinds laughed together. Children played between trees and fountains, their joy proof of growing unity. This place, once a battlefield, now brims with life, Cathar remarked, waving his hand. Mark watched a human child offer alien baby fruit. We came as conquerors, but will be remembered as allies and builders, he replied. Together, they continued their work, not just repairing damage, but creating something new. A living example pivoting from invasion to coexistence, a legacy authored in empathy and unity's ink.